Hi, good afternoon everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Knowledge Exchange series with Pro Manchester, very proudly sponsored by us at Virgin Money. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name's Ruby. I'm usually running these events in our Market Street store in Manchester, but as we all continue to work from home, it's brilliant to still connect with you online through these virtual events. Our priority through the COVID crisis is making sure that we've got the support there offered for our customers, and all the support that we do offer can be found on our website, and we'll make sure that that's circulated to you following the event. And we'd love to know what you think about today's discussions. Do tag us in any of your social posts. We're at Virgin Money on all platforms. And the setup's a bit different today, as you might have already noticed. So if you want to just make sure that your camera is off and that you're muted, and that instead of gallery view you've got speaker view, so that you can only see the speaker who is talking at any given time. And today's topic, we're talking to the travel industry experts of the North. So I'll hand over to Chris Peacock to get it started.
Thank you very much, Ruby, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Ruby's mentioned, we are doing things slightly differently today with the Knowledge Exchange. We do normally do it as a web broadcast, and we've not been able to do that today, so we are doing it as a meeting, which does mean that all of you are able to join us on the meeting, but we do need you all to, if you can, keep your microphones on mute, keep your cameras up, and as Ruby said, watch the speaker view to be able to see who's speaking and when. We do still want to hear your comments and questions though, so we're going to use the conversation chat box, which should be available to all of you. Please feel free to put in any questions or comments in there, and as your host for today, I'll feed those to our guests on our panel. And I'm really pleased to introduce to you all for our chat today. We've got some brilliant panelists to be able to speak to us about transport in the north of England. So without further ado, very quickly, I'm just going to introduce Adam Richmond from Mott MacDonald, who's also the chair of the Pro Manchester Transport and Infrastructure Sector Group. We're also joined by Anna Jane Hunter, who's a director from, director at North of, excuse me, Anna Jane, I completely messed up your introduction there.
It's fine.
Never mind, I'll try again. Anna Jane Hunter, who is the director at Network Rail for North of England Rail. Got it. And finally, Tim Wood, who is the Northern Powerhouse Rail Director at TfN. So we've got a lot of rail to talk about, but I know for all of us who live in Greater Manchester, rail is such an important topic and usually at the top of the list of issues when we are talking about transport. So I think we are going to be quite rail heavy today, but I don't think that's going to be too necessarily a bad thing. So I'm going to kick start straight away, but as always with these, we're very much having a conversation about our topic, and we need you guys to let us know what questions you've got. So let's start off. So Adam, I was going to ask you to start off with, what do you think the effect of COVID-19 has been on transport in the north of England?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Chris. The direct impact is in the statistics. So I think if we look at something like Metrolink, for instance, 95% reduction in patronage at the height of the lockdown, and now that we're coming out of the lockdown or in this kind of interim period, they're back up to about 15% of their usual passenger numbers. If you look at bus, there's been similar reductions, but now back up to about 25% of their usual passenger numbers. Obviously, we all know what's happening with airports, and I think they're running at about 1% of their usual numbers. But the big thing, obviously, for us is I guess this silver lining, if there is such a thing in this, is that there are the numbers of people that are increasing cycling and walking. So at the peak, there were 69% above the annual average people turning to bike. So that worked out at something in the region of about 1 million journeys a week being undertaken in Greater Manchester by bike, up from about 85,000. So I think it's had a massive impact, obviously. But yeah, I guess the difficulty will be how we move into the future of, TFGM are going to have to manage this message at the moment, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Anna Jane, as well, of public transport operators saying don't try to limit the use of public transport for the moment, please.
Yeah, it's been a really unprecedented time for us in the transport sector. Telling your passengers not to use your product feels counterintuitive to all of us, because normally we're all about and we believe passionately in expanding use of all public transport, but in my case specifically rail. So that's been really difficult. But there's been some successes as usual. The industry's pulled together. So we've managed to run a key worker timetable and keep strategic freight rail going, which has been really essential to keeping the nation moving, getting people to work and keeping those shelves stocked after the toilet roll crisis, obviously. And so we've been able to do that working together, but we are running a lot of trains with hardly anybody on them at the moment. Let's be really honest about that, and that's really difficult for us to see. It's been quite a confusing time for passengers and for our staff. So we're starting to hopefully come out of that a little bit now and get a little bit of clarity on what the new normal might begin to look like. There's probably several versions of a new normal to work through. I don't think there's going to be just one, but we're starting to see a bit of that. And another thing to be honest about in central Manchester in particular is we've seen a glimpse of what performance might look like in the future for rail. So we've had unprecedentedly high levels of performance in terms of the public performance measure. It's been 90 plus across all operators consistently day in, day out, with almost an absence of exceptions, actually, bar a few sort of fire incidents and things. And clearly that's a false dawn, because it's not realistic. The only reason we've been able to do that is because there's no people on the trains and there's fewer trains running. But we do need to learn what we can take from that and what we can take forward into that new normal. And that's really about just a hard, long look at what's the right number of trains, what's the right type of trains, and really trying to reintroduce our timetables in a resilient and in a safe way that we can try and take as much of that as possible, because it's what the people of the north deserve.
Where are you in the timetabling process, Anna? What sort of service level are you running at the moment?
So it varies operator to operator, and clearly to an extent location to location, but there's a further uplift coming on Monday, which is going to see the key operators in the north step up to around 75% of their usual services. That's not without its risk, although it has been done in a really controlled manner. But you'll be aware, Adam and others, that we're still in the midst of new trains introductions for both Northern and TPE, and that's understandably been held back a little bit through the COVID restrictions, because a lot of that training, particularly for drivers, involves them working in really close proximity, and there was a ban on 2 people in the cab, so that's gone back a bit. So we're not out of the woods yet, but we're going to be running some more trains from Monday, and then there's a further step up expected in September, but we're reviewing that, as time goes on.
That's brilliant. That's really interesting. Tim, from what's the perspective of TfN in regards to COVID-19 and the problems or opportunities it's created?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So opportunities for us, as Anna Jane sort of clearly articulated there, passenger numbers are well down from where we had pre-COVID times. And I think it's given opportunities to carry out further work on the infrastructure, to get better access to the infrastructure. And I think for us, in overall proximity to this, we can see those numbers slowly but surely starting to grow. And I think where we're coming from is the fact that the timetable is being run to a ppm of well in the 90%. Why can't that carry on? So as we start to come out of COVID-19, we want to make sure that the ppm does stay as high as that and consistently across the board. And I think we need to think about the train service pattern and how you're able to maintain that. I think going a little bit wider with what I do in Northern Powerhouse Rail. So we have had an effect of COVID-19. There's been our delivery partners, our support consultants, a lot of people self-isolating. And what that has meant is the delivery of the strategic outline case has now moved from our January 21 board to our March 21 board. But that's where we'll be making a case for fully transformational railway across the north of England. And it's really an economic scheme. So it starts to look at, capacity, connectivity, all those great jobs that we really need up here in the north of England, supporting tourism, people getting out and about a lot more easier, and in terms of being a seamless journey, a faster journey as well. So yes, we have certainly seen some impacts across our programme, but we will be there in March delivering that SOC.
That's really interesting, Tim. I was going to ask all of you actually this question about things like the strategic outline case and a lot of the forecasts that are used to create the models for future, and certainly some of the big plans we've got for transport infrastructure in the north of England. Given the comments that we've made about passenger numbers going down, which is understandable when people are working from home and have been furloughed, but given the change of this new normal where nearly all of us who are working, or a large number of us who work in central Manchester, for example, are having to work from home now. And there are further discussions about how our working pattern is going to change with more flexible working hours, the flexibility of working from home more often. Is there a possibility that some of the forecasts we see for increased passenger numbers now changing the modelling in terms of what's required for the future? In essence, are we going to need what we had planned before COVID-19 started? Are we still going to need that level of delivery in terms of opportunity for passengers to be travelling more, and particularly thinking of your point, Anna-Jane, about freight? Do we need as much as we previously talked about if less people are on the trains? I'll go with you, Anna-Jane, first.
Yeah, so I think, well, the freight point, I think, if anything, freight is going to continue to grow. I think strategic freight is key to sustainability agendas, which are huge for both government policy and also just, I think, as a nation. One of the things COVID has accelerated really in people's minds, I think, is what the world could be like if we have fewer cars on the road, if we have a better approach to sustainability. So freight offers real opportunities there. So if anything, I would see potentially a ramping up of the freight agenda in the near to medium term. Your question on passenger numbers and modelling is a really interesting one, and you know, forecasting passenger demand is a bit of a dark art, and it's not without its pitfalls to begin with. Aside from global pandemics and all the rest of it, it's not an exact science in any event, and there's varying different approaches to it, and you know, optimism and pessimism and all that stuff. So that's no different after COVID, but you're right to point out that the world potentially looks different. I think we've just got to all hold our nerve a bit, because we don't know yet, none of us do, whether this is going to be a short-term blip and everything's going to recover very quickly, or whether it's going to be a more sustained change of working patterns, change to the economy. You know, it would be wrong of me to try and imply that I know. I certainly don't, and I would suggest that actually nobody does, unless they've got a crystal ball. So we continue with our plans. We continue to believe that it's the right thing to do to invest in rail, and rail in the north specifically. We continue to have the backing, and Tim will no doubt build on this. We continue to have the support and backing of the people who need to make those decisions. They're making all the right noises about investing in rail in the north, and they continue to. So I would say let's just go with that until those noises stop being made in our direction.
No, that's great. That's great, Anna. I doubt anyone would question that you don't have the knowledge on this subject. Don't worry.
It's not my forte, I confess.
Well, just
I'll
throw that to you, Tim. Actually, on that, then I mean, what would you say to someone who now would argue that not as many people are using the trains now, so we don't need Northern Powerhouse Rail? I know you're very passionate about it.
So when you look at the growth over the last 20 years, it's been around 194%. And how many people in the north of England do use the train? I can tell you, it's 2% of us, just 2%. So when we're looking at a modal shift in terms of getting out of our cars and having that extra capacity on the railway line that we want to use, that's what NPR is really all about. And I think yes, there is a blip. We absolutely get that. But when the first NPR services are running for our programme, you know, they'll be probably in the third quarter of the 2020s that we start running services. So I think it's really important that for us, we want to see that growth come back, and I absolutely believe it will come back. You know, we'll be finding the antidote to COVID-19. We'll be in a position where that restrictive 2 metre rule down to 1 metre rule will actually go eventually. But we will be living with COVID-19 for a very, very long time. You know, again, I accept that as well. You only just saw the people that visited New Zealand, where, of course, they hadn't had COVID-19, a reported case for 24 days. and then and 2 people arrived from the UK, and all of a sudden, we saw a sort of mini outbreak there. So I think we need to be mindful of what the government's doing, which is really positive for us. But I think in overall terms, we believe that the growth from that 194% will actually carry on. The one thing we do have to be mindful of in terms of business cases, which will affect us for definite, is that the growth forecasts coming out from the ONS, etc., will have an impact on our BCRs. And it will have an impact for a certain period of time. But because we are such a long-term program of work over the next 20 years, by the time we're running, we'll have actually started to catch up with those passenger numbers. So that's where we are at the moment.
I think we always need to remember as well that the NPR is not just looking at that future demand, but is also fixing a problem that's already in place at the moment. And when we, the gross underinvestment in the rail infrastructure in the north for however many years, and I think we also need to remember as well that turning to the car for your journey isn't going to be sustainable. There's net zero is something that we're all aiming towards. That we've got clean air plans that are coming into place. That's not a realistic alternative. Yes, we've got people that are doing their journeys by cycle or walking. They tend to be the shorter journeys. There are still people who have to come into work. It's not, there are a few of us who are quite lucky that we can sit at home in, I'm in a playroom at the moment, doing my day job. But there are a lot of people that have to come into city centres to work. There's an awful lot of people on furlough at the moment that can't work and have to travel. And car isn't going to be the right mode of transport moving forward. So that for me, there absolutely still is the case.
And I think it might just be an opportunity for us to reassess some of those assumptions that we've made for the best part of 30 years, around demand and travel patterns. We still have systems like Moira and the like that assume a behaviour from people on a Sunday, for instance, that just isn't current with how we live in the UK anymore. So that's just one example of where maybe this is an opportunity to say, well, okay, things have changed, but how have they changed? Well, how do we understand peak demand? How do we understand long distance versus short distance travel patterns? What do we need to do for bikes to integrate different modes of transport, such as bike, but also bus and tram? There's potentially opportunities, aren't there, from any crisis? It doesn't all have to be doom and gloom. And I think there's probably just a few in there, just a few examples of where we might use it to build the case for investment, not to undermine it if we choose to see it that way.
Absolutely. And I think you've got very much, the PM's view about levelling up the north of England with the south. Yeah. That is key. I mean, how can we have a population of 500,000 people in Bradford, 25% under the age of 16, and it takes 21 minutes to go 8 miles between Bradford and Leeds? That just cannot be right in the 21st century. And let's not forget, the railway started in the north. The first intercity train was between Liverpool and Manchester. So we need to get back our rights up here in the north of England to really open up those economic benefits, all that placemaking, and we have a great opportunity here, and particularly coming along with the integrated rail plan, with the potential together of MPR, phase 2B for high speed 2, driving out value for money, and that overall programme to make sure that us in the north, 15.4 million people, get our gross value add, our GVA up. We literally produce half of what the southeast do, and yet the population around there is half of us. So that just can't be right. And I think, COVID-19, a lot of the other economic drivers that have been coming into play here, it's our chance. We absolutely need to grab this now, get that money out of Whitehall and get on and build this job. So we do have to make the case. That will happen in March. And then we want to be absolutely off the blocks. We're already looking at the moment at early start programs of work. We want to be out on site later on this year to really understand what the ground conditions are like. We want to be getting on with a couple of stations as well. So it's vitally important that although COVID-19 has been an awful world pandemic, we can learn from that, and we can also attack exactly what we need to do to get this programme off the ground to really bring those benefits to us Northerners.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's a really good points there, Tim, actually. And I think particularly that conversation with politicians, because ultimately all of the decision making is at the hands of politicians in terms of what's happening next. And we've seen over the last couple of years, particularly when things go really badly wrong, that's when the politicians start clicking the fingers, demanding action, whether it is at a local level or a regional level or a national level. Do we think that now, particularly with the levelling up agenda and this government's quite outspoken plans to say that they do want to level up, they do want to see infrastructure spending, which I think we'll hear more about when the Chancellor makes his economic statements next week, where he's going to be talking about a bit more meat on the bones of what the Prime Minister spoke about this week. Do we feel that we have that political momentum now to actually see some of these things delivered? As you said, Adam, and I'll ask you first, that we have stagnated a lot in terms of infrastructure spending in the north, and particularly on our railways. Do you think that now we have reached a point when things are going to start happening?
I'd like to think so, certainly. I don't know is the answer. There's no crystal ball, but there are some good noises coming from Westminster. I think this week we've given a little pot of funding by the looks of it. I think Anna Jane, you'll know a bit more about this, but the rail specific stuff. But there's funding for highways and whatever else. But I just don't know. The mood music feels like it's right at the moment for us, but with the exception of NPR and perhaps Trans-Pennine route upgrade as well, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so we have had that 10 million announcement the other day, which is awfully nice of Boris, and we do need the funding to keep coming. The noises are good. So I work in the political world a lot, and yes, I would say the noises are good at the minute, and I think I'd like to positively report that during the crisis, support for rail has been really good from the political arena. It's been a horrid 2-3 years, to be honest, with quite a lot of criticism coming our way, but they have been really supportive of how we've dealt with the crisis and how we've managed our way through it. I think that patience and understanding will only last as long as we continue to deliver. So we do need the big spending on the long-term projects. That's great. But what we need to continue to do in the meantime is to keep delivering and to keep things moving at pace, because I think what the politicians won't stand for is too much jam tomorrow and too much being blamed on just needing new things, which I'm not saying we don't need them, but we do also need to prove that we can also run a railway in the meantime, and we can do some of the smaller schemes that need to enable things to happen. So the 10 million that Boris announced is a lot about just getting things moving and keeping them moving, and we've been set the challenge of doing that as quickly as we can, basically, to try and deliver some improvements and benefits for passengers, and the politicians are the representatives of those passengers, and they want them delivering just as soon as we possibly can. So I think pace and energy for the task is really important at the minute, and we've got to bounce back from this with even more of that really than we had before, and in my experience it wasn't lacking before, but we just need to come back re-energized and ready for the fight, really.
And Tim, obviously you've with the TfM board is obviously made up of local representatives from across the north of England, particularly a number of political stakeholders, all with their own local agendas, never mind thinking about the north. Are you seeing a greater collaboration amongst political leaders to try and see things being delivered?
Oh, very much so. I mean, our board continues to speak with one voice, and particularly with NPR, we have our various papers going in over this next 6 to 8 months to agree a phasing strategy for NPR, to agree a preferred network for NPR, and then to approve our strategic outline case next March. I mean, we have had wholehearted support from the government. We've received our £75 million for this year in terms of development funding, transport development funding, to get that work completed. So what we asked for and what we got have support for the north. I think the other thing as well is You know, in a Tory manifesto, Brexit was number one, Northern Powerhouse Rail was number two. It's really on the top of the agenda, and we're constantly being asked by the government just how we can accelerate this scheme. Manchester that first weekend, he said, I want to see Manchester to Leeds going in the first leg as quickly as possible, which of course ties in with HS2 and developing the western leg bill first and then the eastern leg second. So for us, political leaders, very, very important. They are the key decision makers. As officers, we will provide the evidence, but our leaders will take the vote and approve what needs to be done. I think there's another key thing as well. Andrew Stevenson MP, he's Cone's MP. He lives up here in the north. He's a northerner. He understands the issues that we have, and he's really coalescing around NPR Phase 2B, works in the north, delivered by the north, the team in the north. And I think that's important, particularly when we hear about, you know, COVID-19, 9.6 million people in this country, working people in this country, are furloughed. I think 25% of those people, when they look to return to work, will not have a job. We need to make sure that we accelerate this work so we're able to offer opportunities to these great people, because that is vitally important, and we can't forget anything that will give us real benefits.
No, absolutely, Tim. I think that's a really important point, and I'd like to come on to that in a second. But I'm just going to set you each question, which I'll let you. I won't ask the answer now because I want to give you some time to think about it. But just thinking on that the Chancellor is making his statement next week where he's going to be telling us where the monies are going to get spent. I'll come back to this at the end. But what would each of you ask? Would be your one ask of the Chancellor when it comes to transport spending? What would you, the one thing you'd love him to say from the dispatch box? I am going to spend X on Y. I'll let you have a think about that. Give you some time to think on it. But no, just thinking on your point there, Tim, about jobs and rebuilding the economy. Where do you see the transport sector being able to help with that? I mean, I think certainly in terms of like delivering improvements to skills, I think is a really important one, not just for the government, but for local authorities and combined authorities at the moment. Where do you see transport being able to solve that problem at the moment? I'll go, Tim, I'll ask you if you want to.
Yeah, so the first thing is to have a really good, robust, resilient public transport system in place where people can actually move to get to work and get back home again. That is firstly a key thing that should be a right in this 21st century. I think then, in terms of looking at some of the build profiles of some of these schemes, you know, there are thousands of people needed to actually build these railways. And for us, what we need to do is to make sure that we can get the jobs to market as quickly as possible. And that means getting our approval next March and then really starting to open up the programme. We won't be working, so altogether 7 corridors we have in Northern Powerhouse Rail. You'll be able to see those on our website. 5 already there and Network Rail operated. 2 brand new lines between Liverpool, Warrington, Manchester, Bradford, centrally, and Leeds. Multi-billion pounds worth of work. And I think we need to make sure that businesses in the north are actually starting to understand the opportunities, how they can get involved, how they can gear themselves up. So we'll be ready, because we have to move at pace. I don't want to be a part of a job that slips on programme and slips on budget. So the earlier people know and understand the position, the earlier you can start to make those strategic recruitment decisions to bring people on board to be able to help us. I've always said in rail that any consultant that's got rail capability and any contractor that has rail capability, I could suck them all in one job, NPR. So clearly I haven't got enough people. And we know in 15 years' time, half the workforce in rail will have retired and left. So it's really important that we make sure that things like the college at Doncaster that was developed for high-speed rail does not suffer the way it has done through lack of investment by people going there because they're saying, where's the work? And we always hear in rail, boom and bust. I'm not interested in that nonsense. I'm interested in a consistent pipeline over the next 20 years to deliver Northern Powerhouse Rail. That's the only way we can go forward.
That's really interesting. Anna Jane, what's your perspective in terms of the skills agenda? Do you agree with Tim in regards to the work, particularly around the workforce and the need for more people?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've been thinking about recently, I've actually been trying to, I'll tell you a bit of a personal story here. I've been trying to help my brother find a new job because he works in the construction industry, in the supply chain for housing construction, which has been seriously hit by COVID. And he works for a particularly small company, so he's a bit vulnerable at the minute. So I've been trying to help him find something that might be a bit more sustainable in the long run. And one of the things I happened upon was HS2 are apparently doing a big 3-month recruitment drive, and they're taking a slightly different approach there, where they're having people who aren't from a rail background fill in sort of like a skills survey, and they're then going to match people to potential jobs that, you know, maybe they would never have even thought about. And I think that's a really good idea, and it plays into a lot of the work I do with women in rail, in that I think the rail industry needs to be a little bit less not invented here about things. You know, there's a lot of people out there who've got skills that we could use, and they aren't necessarily from a rail background. So if we're going to, you know, expand and deliver all that we need to, I think we need to consider whether we need traditional rail people or whether we just need good people, actually, and that's people from a really wide range of backgrounds and skill sets. And that's often just, you know, about having good hard-working northerners as well, which I'm a big fan of. And you know, you can train skills, but you should recruit for attitude, and I'm a big believer in that. So I think if we're going to do what we need to, we just maybe need to think a little bit differently than how we have done in days gone by, and expand our net a little bit to get the real talent that's out there. And there's probably a lot of it out there post-COVID, because people will sadly have been affected, and will potentially have a really good hunger for a new challenge. So we should harness that, I think, and really try and build on that.
I completely agree. When I was growing up, the word apprenticeship was when I were a lad. When I were a lad, I had a southern accent. But when I was growing up, the word, you know, apprenticeship was was almost a bit of a dirty word.
Dirty word, yeah.
But now the opportunities for apprentices in, you know, if we just look at Mott MacDonald alone, we've got the best and brightest young talent coming through from all sorts of backgrounds and from all sorts of interests, who have got a real hunger to work on. You know, the first thing they say is like, can I work on NPR? Can I work on HS2? Can I, you know, they're the ones that they want to work on, and they're the type of people, I guess, you're talking about, Anna Jane, that, you know, let's go and get those people skilled up. It's a perfect time. You know, these people will be in in senior positions when it comes to the delivery of some of these schemes.
But also in the meantime, like for Tim's early exploratory work that he was alluding to there, that's taking place at the end of this year, you know, if we're doing ground condition surveys and things, they don't need to be rail people. They just need to be construction people. Surely we don't need people who know the difference between the 4-foot and the 6-foot to go and have a look at whether there's any cable under there. You know, we just need people who have a transferable skill, and we can fill in the gaps around that. You know, we can teach them about the railway after we get them in, but if they've got some kind of skill or knowledge that's remotely applicable to what we're trying to build and deliver here, then I say, you know, let's do a bit more of that, because it's been a bit of a closed shop. And I say that as a 3rd generation railway manager, you know, so I'm part of the problem too. But we just, if we're going to deliver as much, I think we need to think a little differently about the talent pool.
No, that's great.
I think you're right.
So go on, Tim.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you're right. I mean, you know, it's building up. What do I need more of? Track people or software designers? Well, I need software designers, because those designers are going to really start to articulate how we bring, you know, BIM modeling into the program, how we actually design the railway and travel on it years before it's ever been built, because of all the simulations that we can do. We can take those really key pieces of design where we're sweetening track, or in actual fact, we're designing stations and we're out there and we're building them, years before the track arrives. Now, some people might say, that's just crazy. Well, I'll just point you to Canary Wharf. That's exactly what they did at Canary Wharf. They built that station, the track wasn't even laid to it. And I think we can look at those as a catalyst for economic growth, the centre of the town, or that key piece of the city region. So we're there. We've got that piece of work done. We're starting to put the jigsaw puzzle together, and we're doing it in a different way, a more agile way, a way that we can move at pace. You know, the old ways are going to have to move to one side if we want to get this built in this short space of time. And, you know, our two key delivery partners in this, Network Rail and High Speed 2, it's really important that we're all sat together now. We're not in different offices transferring bits of paper. It's really quick. Fast decision making is going to move this program quick. And I think the other key bit, of course, is we have to, because we need people and put them to work. And that's really important as well.
No, absolutely, Tim. Just to remind everyone who's watching, please, if you do have any questions or comments, please just click on the conversation button, and that should come up on your right hand side. Please ask any questions in there or any comments of what anyone's saying, and I'm more than happy to ask of everyone. I've actually had one question sent over to me around the environment, because we touched on it very, very briefly earlier on. And the question is, do we think, will these new transport, particularly rail projects, in the future be net zero? Tim, I'll go Northern Powerhouse Rail with you.
Take that one. So I would love net zero. So I think we can pretty well get there with stations, with the station design, in terms of power to it, using grey water, brown water. Why not? We've got stations already in existence now. And actually the way this station's constructed, why are we building it on site? Why don't we just build it off site and lower it in place? I think the other key thing as well is the vast majority of NPR will be fully electrified. Where's the electricity coming from? Why can't we take that green energy that comes either down from Scotland, or I live in Lancaster, so out in the Morecambe Bay here, the biggest wind farm in Europe that got built. Why aren't we tapping into that energy? So as long as the phasing and the harmonics, I'm going a little bit technical there, work for us, and the guarantee of that power, why can't we stipulate that? I think it's really important that we get to that point. The way that the new trains would be constructed, when they've done their time and they're stripped back down again, that pretty well everything is recyclable. I don't think there's actually too much difficult on this. So I would like to see us move into that. I'd like to see the site construct. I don't want to see a diesel or a petrol vehicle on the site. I want to see an electric vehicle that's come. You know, great companies like JCB developing both hydrogen and battery powered excavators, dump trucks. Why can't I have those on my sites? So I think it's really important that we do really push that agenda. And I'm very keen that when we go out to tender, we start to stipulate some of these requirements in our tender documents. So when I go out to tender, I'm 80% quality and 20% price. And that is really important message. I want to get that quality out, because that quality will drive that price. So that's where I am. So
I think my view would be it's just about when, so that the person asking the question didn't say net zero by when. So I think the aspiration is there, and Tim's articulated it really well there. And I'd struggle to find anyone who didn't share that aspiration that we want to be net zero, but it's about being realistic about the journey we're on, really, and the structure that the railway in particular operates within. And we do have, you know, legacy fleet, legacy stations that will have to catch up. So in terms of building new things, yeah, I think absolutely Tim and others can lead the way and should aspire to net zero in building new stuff on the railway. But if I'm being really honest rather than pessimistic, I think it'll be a while before we can catch the whole network and the whole system up, but we shouldn't stop aspiring to it. It's just we need to be realistic about when, I think.
Happy to hear you say, Tim, about not wanting to see a diesel vehicle on a construction site. That would be I'd be quite happy with that myself. I think one of the yeah, it'd be great. I think, you know, there are great opportunities that we've got. If we look at some of the, you know, the High Speed 2 tunnel, for instance, that you know, could potentially go from the airport through to Piccadilly. The arisings from that tunnel, let's get that on the rail. Let's you know, let's not get hundreds of vehicles every hour transporting that around as well. You know, thinking properly about how we deliver these projects in an environmentally friendly and safe for our for our health as well. We already have poor air quality in Manchester. We know that. Anything that we can do to improve that is obviously good.
No, absolutely. And I think, the question spreads wider. So for us, going between Manchester and Leeds via central Bradford, we need some sizable tunnels. So what would we do with millions of cube of muck coming out of there? Well, some of it we can reuse it. Some of it we can't reuse it. So what are we going to do with it? So we know with Crossrail, they created an island. So could we look at, opportunities of really putting something back into the environment, back into the communities that will be really helpful? And we need to do that thinking right now, not when a job's in design or started, because decisions have already been made. So it's that really early thinking of companies to say, here are a range of suggestions that we can work with, because we never do we? We always go, we've decided all, we've got the business case, and then here are contractors and designers, get on with it. And the designer designs and the contractor goes, well, I can't really build to that, I need to change things. Then all of a sudden we start to see prices changing. So really we want to build in that thought processes far earlier. And I always said, I want a contractor on board now. Lo and behold, I've got a contractor on board now. Mesa supporting us in our project management office, and all that buildability that they've got is really giving us some key support and some key decision making. And I think those are the things where we need to start far earlier, rather than you do this bit, then we move on to that, then we move on to that. So the other thing with MPR is we will be working on all corridors at all times, whether it's consenting work, design work, or physically out there constructing. And we are not looking to do a corridor, move on to the next one. We will be working on multiple corridors, because the train goes right through a number of corridors. So it has to have a timetable to be able to work to. So again, when you start to open up multiple corridors, there is a big resource constraint. Treasury were really clear. You don't have the resources, you don't get the money. Absolutely right. So that's where key messages here are, be ready. This job is definitely coming.
That's great. Thanks, guys. We've had a question come through on the chat from Philip. So thanks very much, Philip, for putting a question into us. I'm just going to amend. Well, I won't read it all out, but I'll just get across the main message around it. There's been a lot of discussion about talent pool. And do any of the panel have a view on how MPR, NWR, HS2, larger consultants, Network Rail, how can they, or should they, be engaging with the SME community around programs to help with that talent pool? Are there things that are being done at the moment, or are there things that aren't being done at the moment that maybe we should be looking at in terms of engaging the SME community? Adam, do you want to have a stab at that first?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just look at the work that Mott MacDonald are doing with NPR, so we're contracted into Network Rail and delivering for Tim. The work that we're doing was based on the use of SMEs. Where we identify that there is somebody, the better company out there, we could work with them, but absolutely, SMEs are fundamental to what we're doing, and yeah, we will work with them. So from a large multi-disc consultancy, the door isn't closed by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, we're keen to work with you.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. So our program, we want to see about 80% SME delivering MPR, and I think the other key thing, particularly around the Manchester piece, is where's the training for any rail qualifications or any rail opportunities that would bring youngsters in, because it's going to be a really big construction site in terms of the station, in terms of the tunnelling approaches, in terms of moving infrastructure out of the way. The whole gambit comes then into play of offices, retail, everything else that will really provide that big economic push in Manchester to make it, our second capital of the country. So what's really important is that measures are put in place working with the SMEs. We have a Northern Rail Industry Leaders Group and the Railway Industry Association that bake into that, where I meet them really regularly, give them a set of key messages, so their businesses and their business developers that turn up can really understand what's coming. Then they can take that to chief exec and boards, so they understand how they can position themselves up as businesses to be able to participate in tenders that we send out and work opportunities, because it's going to affect us all, this railway, and building on what Network Rail already have at the moment will really open up that capacity. So housing sites, we will be a catalyst for helping and supporting housing sites opening up. And so in Transport for the North, we know every single development that's planned in the north of England for the next 10 years. It's all in a big database. We wanted to capture it all to make sure that we were taking economic benefit into our business case for MPR to really strengthen it. So SMEs will play a really, really big part in our delivery, and I'm always welcoming conversations with anybody.
Brilliant, thanks, Tim. Anna Jane, do you want to add anything in regards to that?
Not much, just to say that it continues to be a great source of disappointment to me that when I go to various external events, which I do go to various things, people are always telling me what a nightmare we are to engage with, particularly for SMEs. So I continue to apologise on behalf of me and all my people, because apparently we are just not great at it. We are large and unwieldy, and that is part of the problem. And just looking slightly more optimistically to the future, we are in the middle of the last stage of our restructuring, our Putting Passengers First restructuring, which sees us devolve into regions and routes with their own commercial and procurement strategy. So we've taken a slightly different approach to what we had previously, and we do have regional-based commercial directors with their own C&P teams to contract more locally than we have done previously. So again, it's not my direct area of expertise, so I wouldn't want to claim the world is going to be completely revolutionised, but I have it on good authority that it should help with getting closer to the delivery of the railway, including, project delivery. And so the SME community should be able to, in theory, access us more easily, not just through the big firms in the way that Adam's described, although that is, part of the picture. So I'm optimistic about the future, that we might be better to deal with, but I acknowledge we're not great at the moment.
Great, thanks, Anna Jane. There's nothing wrong with being honest, particularly when we're having chats like this. It's fine. And so we've got one more question that's coming through people attending. I think we covered it slightly at the beginning, but I think it's a good one to finish on before I ask my last question to you all anyway. And I'll probably, if I direct this to you, Anna Jane, to begin with anyway, is what projections is the panel working with regarding people's return to public transport? Specifically, 1, do you envisage a return to pre-COVID or greater levels of public transport use? And 2, by when are you projecting for things to return to normal?
Ooh, well, I think we're potentially in crystal ball territory a little bit here again. So my window onto the world is quite hand to mouth at the minute. So we're working from timetable uplift to timetable uplift in the way that I suggested earlier. So Monday is key, September's the next one, and then December 20 is the next date after that. And really, we're working on emerging advice and guidance from government. So that really drives passenger numbers that we're seeing. So whether that's around social distancing, whether that's around reopening of non-essential retail and the various stages of the end to the furlough scheme, kids going back to school in September, each of those measures has its own impact on how people behave. And as I mentioned earlier on in the chat, none of us know how people are going to react to that. None of us know yet whether parents are going to feel comfortable sending their children back to school in September. None of us know whether businesses are going to have loved the experience of everyone working from home and say, screw the office, let's continue with that, or whether people are desperate to get back. We simply don't know at the moment. So we're working really closely with things like the local authorities to get intelligence around what businesses are telling them, and we're monitoring passenger counts out on the ground. But really, I think that's all we can do at the minute is just go with it and work to what we're seeing and to what people are doing. if anybody knows any better, then hey, let me know. But I'm not sure of a better way.
I think a good way to kind of get a bit of intel is to look at the Transport Focus are doing weekly surveys at the moment, which give you a feeling as to give you a feeling as to how people are feeling on how they return to work. And I'll read a couple of the latest ones out just to give you a bit of a flavour. But 32% of people who normally use passenger transport won't return to it until they feel safe, whatever safe may be. 2/3 of people won't return without social distancing in place, which on its own creates an issue. I mean, the 2 metre social distancing that we have at the moment, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference by going down to a metre plus. There just isn't the capacity on the trams, trains, buses.
Well, it depends how you interpret it, doesn't it? Because I mean, for rail specifically, a train is typically about 2.5 meters wide, so that presented us with a massive problem with 2 meter distancing. Now we're down to a metre plus with mitigation. That puts the onus on people to, wear a face covering, which most people have been generally so far. But then for them to feel safe, as you've used the definition there from Transport Focus, but another way of putting it might be that they need to feel comfortable being as little as a metre, because it is a metre plus, isn't it? So as little as a metre away from someone with a face covering on. A lot of our trains, you end up a lot closer than a metre to people, whether you like it or not. So we just don't know how people are going to feel like that. And a survey is one way of testing it, but I think it's a suck it and see for lots of people, isn't it? We won't know till they actually try it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're quickly running out of time, and there's obviously so much more we could be talking about. But I did ask you
about this stuff,
I know. I asked you one question earlier on. I think we'll finish on that. I asked you about the Chancellor's statement next week. If you could slip a line into his speech next week saying, I am going to give X to Y, what would you be asking of the Chancellor to include in his speech next week? What's the one thing you would put in there? Tim, what would your request to the Chancellor be?
So I think for me, we are already well funded till the end of the financial year. But what I would say is, you need to get ready for our £39 billion in terms of the comprehensive spending review in the following year. We've had 4 decades of underinvestment in the north. We're absolutely in a straitjacket, and we want to get on with levelling up the north. So that's the challenge. We're ready. You need to be ready.
Love it, Tim. Adam, you got one? What would your request be?
I've got 2. First would be a half-hourly service from Knutsford would be great. But I think a bit more commitment to the use of tram train technology. Get some funding into looking in detail at the research of tram train vehicles and start the tests and rolling those out. GM's ready to go with that. There are options for lines going out to all areas, and I'd love to see that sped up.
And Anna Jane, what's your one request?
So mine are a little bit curveball. Well, not curveball, but slightly different approach. The first is that I would just say, a bit like what Tim said, I don't really want any more money. What I'd like is just an easier way of getting the money that's already been promised. So it's more of a kind of oil in the wheels of governance to just make it slightly less, of a pain in the arse, frankly, to just get the money we've already been promised. Not that I don't respect the need for governance, of course I do, but it's just, we'd like to get on and do stuff. And then the second one, we haven't got time to go into it, but it's another matter I could talk for a long time about that people might not have thought too much about, which is about a really comprehensive depots and stabling strategy for the north. I feel like this is a problem that's gotten onto our radar in the last year or so, but it's not fully understood, and I fear it's going to come and bite us in future years if we don't get a handle on it soon. And it falls between the cracks of Network Rail, OM&R, franchise bids and commitments, and future major projects like Tim's. It tends to just not quite get anyone with their arms completely around it. So I'd love to have a pot of money to just do that, or have someone else do that, I should say.
Yeah. If I was asking myself the same question, I would be talking. I live in Bolton, so I would love the Catterfield corridor to be sorted. and certain platforms at a certain station, central Manchester, actually getting its improvements that it needs, which is actually a point that Philip makes also on the question things. But as he says, it's going to take an extra hour if we started talking about the Castlefield corridor. And
which is why we've cleverly navigated away from it.
Well, that gives us the excuse for needing to have a knowledge exchange on transport part 2, when we could possibly look at such things. But sadly, today we've run out of time. So thank you again. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Anna Jane. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for listening and joining in today. Please do join us again next week. We've got another knowledge exchange for you, and that's going to be on the music industry, which I think will be interesting. But again, thank you so much. If you've got any questions that you've not been able to ask today, you want to know more, please get in touch with One Manchester or myself. I think our details are online through Pro Manchester. Please get in touch. Otherwise, have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having us,
Chris.
and thanks for the great questions, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.